John, did he deserve better than 34 seats?
I don't look for justice in political results. He got them. I think the critical error, I think Peter's right that he was looking in the wrong places, but I think that the critical error had to do with Parliament. I think the Liberal campaign was wrapped around the view that if you went before the Canadian people and you said, look at what Mr. Harper is doing to Parliament, he's in contempt of it, that the Canadian people would say, wow, okay, Parliament's our institution, it's important, we need to defend Parliament, so that means we should vote to restore the rights of the people in Parliament, as Diefenbaker would have put it, by voting Liberal. What Harper understood was that actually for a lot of Canadians, enough Canadians who would be willing to support him, because again, Harper does not try to get everybody's vote, he tries to get the votes he can. Parliament had become an institution of contemptibility. It was a circus, an undignified thing you wouldn't show your children, political gamesmanship at its worst. Harper understood that every time that Mr. Ignatieff stuck up for Parliament and attacked Harper, Ignatieff was digging himself deeper into the hole of proving how appalling Parliament was. And you saw this in the leadership debates, on television. Ignatieff would come flying at the Prime Minister about the terrible things you're doing in Parliament, and the Prime Minister would just say, there you go, more politics, more barracking, and more making noise and causing a lot of trouble. Why don't we get on with governing the country? The second critical error, and you saw it in this defining moment in the leaders' debate, had to do with not taking the NDP seriously. For 10 years, the NDP has been on a direct mission to destroy the Liberal Party of Canada and supplant it as the alternative to the Conservatives. That was not prevalent in the thinking of successive Liberal campaigners, myself included. When I was involved extensively in 04 and 06, we didn't really recognize it for what it was. And so there is Ignatieff on television pursuing his defense of Parliament point, kind of expecting Layton, the other opposition guy, to back him up on this. And Layton, in the French debate, delivers the absolute coup de grace and says, yeah, but you don't even show up for your votes. Kaboom. There goes the credibility. There goes the whole attack. And Harper just sits there and goes, you see, that's what's wrong with Parliament. Those guys who are supposed to be on the same side, they can't even agree with each other. And the results are there for all to see. I think Ignatieff was fighting the wrong place and didn't understand what was coming up behind him at all, and that produced the result.
Peter?
That English debate, of course, was the turning point. And I was the first journalist to write about body language, the only language that doesn't lie. And the body language, Harper was brilliant. He never moved. His eyes, his eyes were on the lens of the camera, which of course put him into every living room in the country. And the other candidates were talking to each other and turning their heads. He just looked at the boots of the cameraman right into the lens. And, you know, in that case, it was a negative body language, but he used it to best. And you know, body language is weird because I talked to Ignatieff about it. When he first arrived, he would come into a room like this and he would talk to a square like a classroom, you know, the front, maybe 10 rows, and ignore everybody else. And I said, you can't do that. You know, these people have come to hear you, and you're just talking to a select few like you were in a classroom. So he got over that, but he never, in fact, you can prove that he didn't have a body. He had shoulders, but they just sort of, the body just sort of vanished. It's strange.
Let's take the microphone off Michael Ignatieff, or the microscope rather, off Michael Ignatieff and put it on the party as a whole. John, natural governing party for so many years. And then suddenly 2000, 04, 06, 08, 11, it is a downward line, the performance of the Liberal Party of Canada from the beginning of this century. In which case, how much of this does Michael Ignatieff really have to wear, or how much of this is just the natural result of something that's been in decline for a long time?
Well, two things. I think the decline has actually been going on longer. And I probably need to say this because once you've been around something for 30 years, you wake up and realize that you're probably bearing a share of the responsibility. I used to blame the older generation when I was a young liberal. Now I am the older generation. So, so obviously the decline began before me. Look, within that, I think the Liberals have been in a long decline, and I think it actually goes back to the moment in 1968 that Peter described so eloquently. That's how I see it. I think what the Liberals have done to themselves, probably more than anything, what they've done to themselves. There are ways that the game has changed, and we should talk about that a little bit. But I think what the Liberals have done to themselves is that they used to be the party of the broad middle class. They were the party of the aspirations of the broad middle class, and they were the party that successfully embodied the best aspirations of that. Mr. Pearson, Mr. Saint Laurent, Mr. King before him, those people had made that image and that proposition the beating heart of what the Liberal Party was in Canadian politics. And Mr. Trudeau came along and he said, well, that's all nice, but I actually think we're the party of rights-bearing, and I think we're the party of French power, and we're the party of several new things. Now, that's not to say for a moment that those aren't very good and important things, but they were different from what everybody had theretofore associated with the Liberal Party of Canada. Great run for 16 years doing that, had its ups and downs, but a magnificent legacy which has shaped their world. And then along comes Mr. Turney, he says, yeah, no, we weren't really about that, we're actually about this. And then in 1988, he has to do another virage, as they call it, Quebec, another swerve, and say, well, actually, we're against globalization because this free trade deal is a menace. Then we go to Aylmer at the Aylmer conference, and we say, no, actually, we embrace globalization, and that's Mr. Chrétien and Mr. Martin. So we run a very intelligent, smart, strong managerial, pro-globalization, fiscally conservative government for 12 years. Great, fine, magnificent legacy. You know, proud for the tiny role I played in that. Then we get Mr. Dion, who says, oh, okay, no, what we're really about is the environment. And everyone goes, okay, but like, where did that come from? And by the way, who are you? Then Mr. Ignatieff comes along and says, environment, never met the man. Who's that? Is that a cough syrup? I don't know. So we don't run on the environment at all. And instead we run on what I think was this very narrow dispute with the government where you couldn't really tell what we'd do terribly different, except it had something to do with Parliament, which nobody liked. So you keep swerving back and forth. I don't like the language of brands to describe political offerings. I think it sort of diminishes things and confuses them. But if this were a brand, it makes Coke, Diet Coke, New Coke, Coke Classic look purely consistent. The Liberals have swerved back and forth as to what their fundamental offering is, and along the way have really let down their core political constituency, which is the aspiring middle class, and have conveyed the impression that the Liberals actually take those people for granted as a vehicle who will always be there with us, and we'll put something on top of that that's the latest flavor of the month, or what the new leader or his team thinks. I'm guilty of some of that. A lot of people who have been in the position of helping shape the Liberal message over the years are guilty of that. And what's happened is it's opened up something that I call the authenticity gap, where along the way, people began to be deeply suspicious of whatever Liberals were saying because they knew that it was new and something that had just been cooked up and didn't sound like anything they'd ever heard from the Liberals before. In that sense, the Liberals have really let their core constituency down and accelerated their own decline and had a lot to do with bringing themselves to this present pass. And Ignatieff's no more guilty of that than Pierre Trudeau, which is, I guess, the nice way of saying a lot of us are guilty on that one. Peter, your view?
Well, that's a very sanitized version of what happened.
Oh, come on. What do you want?
I love this guy. That's really John spilling his guts, if you know John.
Not good enough.
Why don't we mention...
These bloodthirsty literary lions. They just can't please him.
Why don't we mention the Chrétien-Martin feud, which really defined the party. You could tell the difference between the Conservatives and Liberals because before that, it was the Conservatives that tore down their leaders. But here, for the first time, it was the Liberals, and that feud was bloody. It was deadly.
Can I read a quote from your book on that? Ray Hurd, whom you spoke to. Ray Hurd, one of the long...
Right there.
Where is he? Oh, there he is right here. Hello, Ray. Ray, this is your quote. Ray said, I blame Paul Martin's thugs for launching the decline of the party. Paul always did what they told him to do, I coined the term Earnscliffe man to describe them as throwbacks to Neanderthal man. Get off the fence, Ray. Tell us what you really think. Is he right about that? You want to blame these guys for the demise of the party?
I think so. And, you know, it
Sitting
was,
beside an Earnscliffe man?
it was
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah, he's one of them. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. And so, you know, it wasn't, I mean, everything that was said was correct, but a lot of it was left out. And this feud was very strange because at one point, Chrétien offered to save Martin, and the offer was that he would stay in office another 3-4 months until the ad scam blew over, and then Martin people could come in.
The Auditor General's report was received. He would have received the report instead of Martin receiving it.
But the offer was refused. That was the version that I have heard and wrote.
Well, I think they thought they'd waited long enough for the for the office. No, John?
That wasn't really the issue. The other thing is I mean, look, we get to hear the rhetorical ruffles and flourishes, and Raymond's got his, and there have been a lot of things that have been said in public and private. I think this stuff has been very corrosive for the Liberals, but I don't agree that it defined the Liberals. I got to tell you, I mean, the thing that if you want to measure this stuff, and you know, I'm not a pollster, but I listen carefully enough to try to measure it. You compare the corrosive effect of long-term family feuding to decisive things, like the Auditor General's report that really broke the sponsorship scandal. That produced a 17-point drop in Liberal support in the space of about a week. Now, no amount of family feuding and bitter nomination struggles and catty things that Liberals said to each other in public is going to measure up to that kind of thing. Those are the big definers. We need to have some perspective. I think there are the dramatic events in the battering of the Liberal Party, and there are the long-term corrosive things. I think the feuding is really a function, in part, of, again, a cavalier attitude that Liberals have had towards the party and the people that they seek to represent. The view has always been, well, it's a vehicle, it's reliable, you can put what you want on top of this thing, it will still reliably get you into power.
But
So you get to change it and shift it around, and slowly, the real issue wasn't Liberals fighting with each other, it was people getting off this vehicle and saying, does this have anything to do with me anymore? Are they trying to do anything for the country that actually helps me and my family? Or are they just in it for themselves and maybe just visiting? It's corrosive.
Peter, let's talk hubris for a second here, because you quote Jack Pickersgill, one of the great lions of the Liberal Party from many decades ago, saying, "It's not merely for the well-being of Canadians, but for the good of mankind in general, that the present Liberal government should remain in office."
That's a great quote. You know, so everyone, there's going to be a quiz on that on Tuesday, and I want you.
Did too many Liberals see their party that way?
Well, yes, they did. And there's another great quote in my book, very similar, when they lose the 63 election. Sorry, 62 election.
To Deef.
And Keith Davey, whose son is here. Where is...
He may not want to out himself tonight. He's just anyway, a private citizen tonight. Anyway.
Keith Davies says to Lester Pearson, and I happened to overhear this conversation, because after 3 tries, Pearson still only got a minority. And Keith is very upset about it, and he says, "I'm sorry, we let you down." And Pearson says, no, it was the Canadian people who let us down. In other words, if you don't vote Liberal, then you've done something wrong. And that was the attitude. Mm.
Okay, we're going to talk up here for about another 5 minutes, and then we'll take some questions from you folks tonight. But let's do this. Gordon Gibson, former aide to Pierre Trudeau, former leader of the BC Liberal Party, said, "The Liberal Party is in great danger of being irrelevant. What used to be a genuine, large, and cooperative organization of like-minded people has been turned into an empty shell by centralizing leaders and is now populated largely by celebrity followers and power seekers." You agree?
Yes, that's why I used the quote.
John, fair or not?
Not now. There's no power. No one's in the Liberal Party right now because they're seeking power. What a foolish thing that is to look for in that place. Like my sister says, it's like looking for the Holy Grail at a Tupperware party. Good luck to you. Look, I mean, this whole death of the Liberal Party thing, this is where I really quite decisively get off the bus with Peter. I feel like the guy in Monty Python, right? They say, bring out your dead, and they flop the corpse on it, and you say, oh, I'm not dead yet. And then, John Cleese sort of looks around, and the guy who's flopping him on says, look, we don't want this guy anymore. Can you kind of hit him and take, boom, oh, I'm actually feeling better, boom. There's a whole industry right now that is predicting, encouraging, supporting the idea that the Liberal Party is dead. 50% of it are legitimate objective observers like Peter who would argue this case. 50% of it are conservatives and New Democrats who are beating the thing. Look, he's dying. Look, you don't want to vote for that guy anymore. He's dying. You got to consider the motivations. I think something kind of neat is happening in the Liberal Party right now, and we can talk about it in the Q&A a little bit. But the power seekers and there isn't any power, and the celebrities are all gone. The only thing that's really left right now are people who actually give a darn about this thing, and they're really working their hearts out trying to renovate it. They're trying to renovate the ability, to rebuild the ability of the party to function in a new political environment. So they're trying to change all of what I call the hardware of how the party operates in a different fundraising world, in a world of the internet and social media. They're trying to do all that. And they're also trying to renovate the software and to reconnect with the middle-class values and the middle-class policies that actually are the beating heart, as I said, of the liberal tradition. I think that's really exciting work. It's not work for power seekers and celebrity followers. It's work for ordinary folks who are well-motivated, and I think they're working on it. So I'm happy about the state of the Liberal Party right now.
Let's have you make the case. Why do you believe the Liberal Party has no future?
Well, let's look at it. First of all, you have the record. And you know the record, 135 to 107 to 77 to 35. That's a loss of 800,000 votes per election. How do you repair that? I don't know. So you have that in the background. Then you have no safe house in the country, because the few MPs who still are liberals are hanging out there like lost astronauts, connected to nothing. And then you have the fact that they have no leader, they have no platform, but more important than any of it, and Harper realizes this, is the money. Where will the money come from? Because the subsidy's gone, and the myth is that people give money to political parties because they're patriotic. And I'm sure that there is something in that. But most people give money because they want something back from the party, whether it's an invitation to a garden fete or whatever, or an ambassadorship, if you want to go from the top to the bottom. And the Liberals have nothing to give. They have no patronage. They have no gifts to disperse. So this is very difficult. I mean, a third party is like a one-way ticket to nowhere.
Well, but tell me this. The election didn't happen that long ago, and already, under the admittedly interim leader, and we'll see how interim that is, Bob Rae, they're 10 points higher today than they were on May the 2nd.
Well, I knew you'd say that.
I didn't want to disappoint you.
But on page 141 of my book, there's the same, let me look it up, but the same thing said about Ignatieff when he, at the beginning of the election, page 242.
Checking.
He went from 16% to 25%, and that looked very good. And there are these minor waves, but it doesn't mean anything. And
but it might, though.
Well,
we don't know that yet, do we? You say it's a minor wave that doesn't mean anything, but it might mean something.
Well,
We
by
just
the
don't know
end of
that.
the election, he had the same national approval as Elizabeth May, who was running in one constituency and never moved away from that constituency. Ignatio's national approval rating was the same as Elizabeth's in one riding.
John?
Well, I think straight line projections are a pretty risky business. The idea that, certainly past performance is the best indicator of future promise, but I remember Mark Twain once wrote that, the Mississippi's a windy river, right? And it would occasionally cut off a meander and slightly shorten its course. And Mark Twain wrote that if the current rate of meander cutoff continues for the Mississippi River, there will be no Mississippi River by the year 2014. We're getting close to 2014, and there is still a Mississippi River last time I checked. Parties can come back. They do come back. They change themselves. There is a real scenario where it doesn't happen. We've seen that in Western Canadian provinces where Liberals have actually been unable to recover, slipping into third place, and have then been broken up and absorbed into Conservative and New Democrat parties, leavening them both a little bit and creating stable, viable two-party systems. I don't believe that's going to happen nationwide, and I would point to Ontario in all of this. The idea that the Liberal project is completely shipwrecked flies completely in the face of the results of October 6th. And I think when you look at the kind of agenda that Liberals want to be standing for and can be standing for and can rebuild their political ruined estate on, look at what Premier McGuinty has done here. Education, healthcare, core public services, popular middle-class entitlements that Liberals can stand for with pride. Restructuring the economy in order to be able to meet the challenges of a changing world, green technology, and care for the environment. These are supposedly the out-of-fashion values that have no constituency, and yet an unpopular government running for a third term, government that was really showing signs of mental fatigue, was able to win a near majority on this in the biggest province in the country. And you look at the provincial agenda in Quebec, where the besieged government just won a by-election last night in Bonaventure, Île-de-Madeleine. You look at the election of Alison Redford, is the head of the Progressive Conservative Party of Alberta, someone who's running on, guess what, healthcare and education. And who is she appealing to? Female voters. Talked to her chief of staff about it. You look at these things and you say that whatever institutional form this may take, the Liberal idea and the Liberal proposition in Canada is alive and well enough that if the Liberal Party of Canada actually will articulate this consistently over a period of more than half an hour, it ought to be able to connect to something that is alive in this room and that's alive in this country.
Last word to Peter before we take questions.
Let me just, because the Western Canada was mentioned for the first time. The Liberals only have 2 seats in Western Canada. I'm talking about the prairies, and they could never recover, and Trudeau was very concerned about this. So the story goes that he called in his chief of staff, and he sent him out west, and the instructions were that he should go to the toughest bar in Calgary and yell out, Trudeau is a horse's ass. And people would come and agree and tell him why. And then he would come back and tell Trudeau what the problem was. Well, what happened was that, and it was Jim Coots.
Yeah, is Jim in the hall tonight, actually?
And Jim Coots went into the toughest bar in Calgary and yelled, Trudeau's a horse's ass. And instead of people coming and agreeing with them, the fellow standing next to him hit him, and he passed out. And then when he came to, he went to see this fellow, and he said, I don't understand what happened. You were supposed to agree with what I said, and instead you hit me. You must be for that. This must be Trudeau country. And I said, no, it's horse country.
Very good. Very good. Very good. Let me just let me just ask a little mischievous question here before we get started, because I think it's fair to say, John, you correct me if you think I'm wrong, the most successful Liberal politician in the country today is the Premier of Ontario. He's got, he did something on the 6th of October that no one's done in this province in 127 years, I think, which is win 3 elections in a row as a head of a Liberal party. If Dalton McGuinty were, let's say, a year and a half down the road, well, it would have to be a year down the road, if he decided that he wanted to seek the federal Liberal leadership, how many people here think he could bring the Liberal Party back to respectability? Hands up.
Sure could.
Hands down. How many people think it wouldn't make a difference at all? Doesn't matter. Dalton couldn't do it. Interesting. Okay. Just wanted to know. Questions, right here.
I also think there's no chance that that's going to happen.
It's not going to happen,
Yeah,
no,
so
but, you know.
It's a great question.
Some people who love great stories live in hope.
He won't get the horse vote. That's the
Microphone, please.
Hello. Yeah, Mr. Newman, when I moved to Canada a long time ago as a child from Ethiopia, Brian Mulroney was in power. He had a government, a progressive government that did so much for Canada, with the exception of the GST, complementing the great work of Brian Stewart in Ethiopia, helping the famine victims. I know Brian is somewhere here, and his wife is doing an amazing work, and doing so much, good stuff, and even fighting for the end of minority rules in South Africa, and lots of work. But that progressive conservative party doesn't exist anymore. We have the NDP, which is the left, and we have
friend, I'm going to jump in here because we've got a long line of people behind you, and we can't be here till midnight.
Okay.
So, question, please.
So my question is, I'll rephrase what Jean Chrétien used to ask Brian Mulroney, which is, are we content with being governors rather than prime ministers of our own land by totally removing a party that's from the center, which is the Liberal Party of Canada?
Peter, can this country survive without a centrist party?
I don't think so, and I think what you're going to see is a move to a sort of pragmatic center. It won't be an ideological center, but it'll be a kind of a Harper imitation, which he's doing quite successfully now. It's all tactical, but it's still moving towards the center. Now you can say, well, it's not really true because he wants to burn all the old applications in the gun registry, which is really dumb to do that because it's still useful. And there are a lot of ideological problems, but it is still a surprise that the social conservatism that most of us feared hasn't happened.
No. John, if you've got the Conservatives coming in from the right, more to the middle, NDP coming in from the left, more to the middle, is there any middle left for another party to play in?
Absolutely. There's an enormous middle. I again look at the Ontario election results. Look at the United States, where most people, if you ask them what they're looking for, they say something between the Tea Party and what Barack Obama is offering. There's an enormous market for the middle. I think the other thing that's happening is Peter's right in describing the sort of tactical crab walking that has characterized the Harper government's slow accretion into the center. But meanwhile, outside of the little world of Ottawa, there is a global economic crisis of epic proportions. It is now no longer sort of lapping at our shores. It is engulfing a lot of families. I don't think there's anybody in this room whose family has not been touched by what's going on. And the ability of the government to keep skating by saying, oh, look, things are a little better here than they are somewhere else, erodes with each rise in the tide of misery and broken dreams and delayed opportunities. Sooner or later, this government is going to have to come to grips with this and become more activist, or it is going to be a government that manifestly failed to square up to the challenge of its times. And all of the technology and all the money and all the advantage and all the tactical brilliance in the world cannot actually outweigh the spectacle of a failed government in driving people to a realistic alternative. I don't believe that alternative is going to be the New Democratic Party. We'll see how their leadership goes. I think if the Liberals don't deserve to be that alternative unless they clean up their act. There are no defaults here and no shortcuts. But I do believe that this government ideologically and in terms of its whole approach is not prepared to square up to the challenge that we've got, and that will in the end bring them down. And I hope that a renovated and rebuilt Liberal Party that's committed to really helping people and doing things innovatively will